At 6, Ellie vanished without a trace on a transatlantic flight, plunging her parents and the entire world into a deep, enduring mystery. Years later, against all odds, she reappeared on her parents' doorstep with a shocking story no one saw coming. Her return was as mysterious as her disappearance, but it was what she revealed that stunned everyone. "Ellie?" Bianca gasped upon seeing her daughter standing at her doorstep almost 10 years after she had vanished without a trace. She recognized her daughter even after she had aged from a small child to a teenager and hugged her tightly. "Lenny! Ellie is back!" she yelled for her husband, who ran to the door so fast that he almost tripped. He froze as he realized it was really his daughter standing in front of him, and tears began to well up in his eyes. How?" he stammered as he slowly walked toward her, and the three of them hugged in silence. None of them wanted to let go, but it was freezing outside, and her parents had so many questions. They went inside, and Bianca quickly made some tea for the three of them. "What happened, Elle?" her mother boldly asked. Ellie sighed and looked at the ground, scared to look her parents in the eyes. "You're not going to like this," she eventually said. But how had Ellie vanished all those years ago? Where had she been? And why did she come back? It had been an exhausting flight of almost 8 hours. Ellie and her parents were on their way back from a vacation in Paris and couldn't wait to get back to their home in New York. It was a midnight flight, and everyone was sound asleep when Ellie woke up to use the restroom. She decided to go on her own, as she didn't want to wake anybody. Ellie still remembered the flight like it was yesterday. "You all looked so peaceful," she said, as she grabbed her mother's hand. "I knew I had given you a hard time by not wanting to sleep early, so I didn't want to disturb you," she added. Bianca's eyes filled up with tears for her innocent daughter. If only she had known Ellie had gotten up to pee. While 6-year-old Ellie walked through the quiet plane, she got curious, as any 6-year-old would get. So, after using the restroom, she didn't return to her seat. Ellie had a big imagination as a little girl, and she made up a game in her head. She was walking through the lair of a lion, and she couldn't get caught, or else she would be eaten alive. "I remember crawling through the aisle and hiding for the cabin crew," she said, with a slight smile on her face. Lenny could see his daughter was hiding guilt under that smile, and put his arm around her. "It's not your fault," he whispered softly. "I know," Ellie said, but her voice trembled with sadness. "I was just so young." "What happened next?" Bianca asked eagerly. It was hard for her to hear her daughter live through that moment again, but she knew it was information that had to come out. "There was this woman," Ellie suddenly said. "She told me to come with her." Bianca and Lenny were listening intently, worried about what was going to happen next. "I remember feeling the plane lowering and seeing the seatbelt light popping on. People were waking up, and the woman told me to go through a small door and gave me some sort of candy I had never seen before. I waited for you guys to come get me, but after eating the candy, I suddenly felt super sleepy, and I passed out." Bianca gasped. "We need to call the police," she said, as she jumped up and reached for her phone. "No," Ellie suddenly firmly said. "I don't want the police involved." Lenny confusedly looked at his daughter. "You know your disappearance was national news, right? You can't just come back unnoticed," he said. Ellie paused. "Well, I'm not coming back." Stunned, Bianca and Lenny listened as Ellie announced she wasn't planning to stay. They had just thought they had her back. And now, this. Ellie stood in the doorway, her bag still slung over her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said, looking away. "I just needed to see you both. But I can't stay." The words hung heavy in the air, an unexpected twist in their reunion. Bianca's eyes filled with questions she couldn't voice. Ellie, exhausted, mentioned, "I'll explain everything in the morning." She looked worn out, shadows under her eyes. "Can I sleep here tonight?" she asked, her voice softer. Bianca and Lenny exchanged glances, their relief mingled with worry. "Of course," Lenny said, stepping forward. Ellie gave a small, grateful smile. "Thanks. I just need to rest." She headed towards the stairs, dragging her feet, the weight of unspoken stories pressing down. Reassuringly, Bianca told Ellie, "This is your home, too. You can stay in your room tonight and all upcoming nights." Ellie paused on the stairs, looking back at her mom. "Thanks, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Bianca reached out, touching Ellie's arm lightly. "We're here for you, no matter what," she said. Ellie nodded, a small tear escaping down her cheek. "I know," she replied, her voice breaking. Bianca prepared Ellie's room, making it as welcoming as possible for her unexpected extended stay. She fluffed the pillows, spread a fresh blanket, and placed a vase of flowers on the nightstand. She lingered, looking around the room, memories of Ellie's childhood flooding back. The sound of Ellie's footsteps in the hallway brought her back. She took a deep breath and stepped out, ready to give Ellie the space she needed. Ellie retired to her room early, leaving her parents filled with a mix of relief and lingering questions. Lenny watched the door close, his heart heavy with concern. Bianca sat on the edge of the couch, staring into space. "She's home," she said softly, almost to herself. Lenny nodded, but worry clouded his eyes. "Yes," he replied, "but for how long?" The house fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Bianca and Lenny, unable to sleep, lay in bed, with Bianca boldly declaring, "We can't let her go a second time." Lenny turned to look at her, worry etched on his face. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice low. Bianca shook her head, determination burning in her eyes. "We have to find a way," she said firmly. "She needs us, even if she doesn't realize it yet." Lenny remained silent, conflicted about how they could keep Ellie without forcing her. He stared at the ceiling, thoughts swirling in his mind. He knew Bianca was right, but he didn't want to push Ellie away. "We need to be careful," he finally said. "We can't make her feel trapped." Bianca sighed, frustration evident. "I know, but we can't just let her leave again," she replied. Silence filled the room once more. Resolute, Bianca suddenly got up and left the bedroom with a determined stride. Lenny watched her go, too tired to follow, but too worried to sleep. He heard her footsteps fade down the hallway, and then the soft creak of the stairs. Lenny lay back, staring into the darkness. He trusted Bianca, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in his chest. What was she planning? Downstairs, Bianca rummaged through drawers and closets, formulating a plan in the quiet of the night. She pulled out papers, keys, and an old toolbox, laying everything on the kitchen table. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more desperate than the last. She glanced at the clock, the late hour pressing on her. She needed to act fast before doubt could creep in. She took a deep breath and got to work. Unbeknownst to Lenny, Bianca took decisive action that night, changing the locks and hiding the keys. She moved quickly and quietly, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Each click of the lock echoed in the stillness. When she was done, she stepped back, looking at her work. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. She hid the keys in a place only she knew. As she headed back upstairs, she felt a mix of relief and fear. Lenny was abruptly woken by Ellie's frantic words. "Bianca locked us inside." He blinked, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. Ellie stood by the bed, her face pale and eyes wide with panic. "What are you talking about?" he mumbled, still half asleep. "The doors won't open," she insisted, her voice trembling. Lenny sat up, feeling a knot of worry tightening in his stomach. This couldn't be happening. Still groggy, Lenny tried to prove her wrong by opening the front door, which indeed wouldn't budge. He twisted the knob, pushed and pulled, but it was locked tight. "This can't be right," he muttered, his frustration growing. Ellie watched, her anxiety evident. "See? I told you," she said, her voice edging towards hysteria. Lenny frowned, trying to stay calm. "Okay, let's check the other doors," he said, heading towards the back. Panic ensued as Lenny discovered that not only the front door, but all possible exits were securely locked. He tried the back door, the windows, even the garage door, but nothing would open. Ellie followed him, her fear growing with each failed attempt. "What's going on?" she cried, her hands shaking. Lenny's mind raced. He knew Bianca was behind this, but he didn't understand why. "We need to find the keys," he said, determination in his voice. A thorough search confirmed their worst fears. All the house keys were missing. They checked every drawer, every cupboard, and even the coat pockets, but the keys were nowhere to be found. Ellie sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "This is insane," she muttered. Lenny paced the room, his mind spinning with thoughts. "Bianca must have them," he said, trying to think of their next move. "But why would she do this?" Frustration and confusion peaked as they realized the extent of their confinement. Lenny sat down next to Ellie, rubbing his temples. "We're trapped," he said, the reality sinking in. Ellie looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice small. Lenny took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "First, we need to talk to Bianca," he said. "There has to be a reason for this." Lenny attempted to soothe Ellie, asking about her earlier claim. "Why don't you want to come back?" Ellie looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and sadness. "It's not that simple, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. Lenny reached out, trying to offer comfort. "We're here for you, no matter what," he said softly. Ellie sighed, looking away, the weight of her secret heavy on her shoulders. Ellie sighed deeply and replied with a heavy heart, "You won't understand." Looking directly into her father's eyes, Lenny felt a pang of helplessness. "Try me," he urged gently. Ellie shook her head, tears welling up. "It's too complicated," she whispered. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Lenny reached out, but Ellie pulled back, her pain evident. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice barely audible. At that moment, Bianca entered with a police officer, causing Ellie to feel a deep sense of betrayal. Her eyes widened as she stared at her mother. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. Bianca looked pained, but resolute. "We need to talk," she said. Ellie shook her head, backing away. "You called the cops on me?" she asked, her voice breaking. The officer stepped forward, but Ellie retreated further. Feeling cornered, Ellie locked herself in her room, shutting out her parents and the officer. She slammed the door, the sound echoing through the house. Lenny rushed to the door, knocking softly. "Ellie, please come out," he called. Inside, Ellie leaned against the door, tears streaming down her face. "Go away!" she shouted. The officer and Bianca exchanged a worried glance. Lenny's heart ached, hearing his daughter's muffled sobs. An angry Lenny confronted Bianca with, "What the hell were you thinking?" As tensions escalated, Bianca stood her ground, her eyes flashing with determination. "I did what I had to do," she replied firmly. Lenny threw his hands up in frustration. "Bringing the police into this, "She's our daughter, not a criminal," he shouted. Bianca's face softened, but she remained resolute. "We need help, Lenny. We can't do this alone," she said, her voice trembling. The police officer attempted dialogue with Ellie, but met only silence. She refused to engage. He knocked gently on her door, speaking calmly. "Ellie, I'm here to help. Can we talk?" he asked. Inside, Ellie sat on her bed, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the wall. "Ellie, please," he tried again, but the only response was the ticking of the clock on her nightstand. The officer sighed, stepping back. Recognizing his efforts were futile, the officer left, citing inability to act without Ellie's cooperation. "I'm sorry," he told Bianca and Lenny, his expression grim. "Without her willingness to talk, there's nothing more I can do." Bianca nodded, her eyes downcast. Lenny ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "Thanks for trying," he muttered. The officer gave a sympathetic nod before heading out the door, leaving a heavy silence behind. Hours of waiting wore Bianca down until she forcefully entered Ellie's room, expecting to find her. "Ellie, enough is enough," she said, pushing the door open. The room was dimly lit, and Bianca's heart pounded as she scanned the space. "Ellie?" she called, stepping further inside. She checked the closet, under the bed, her anxiety mounting with each passing second. "Ellie, please," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Instead, Bianca found the room empty, the window open, and Ellie gone once again. The curtains fluttered in the breeze, and the chill of the night air filled the room. Bianca's heart sank as she rushed to the window, looking out into the darkness. "No, no, no," she murmured, panic setting in. She turned back to the room, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Lenny!" she called out, her voice breaking. Bianca's discovery of Ellie's note left her in tears, reading, "You will never see me again." She clutched the paper, her hands trembling. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She sank onto the bed, the note falling to the floor. "No," she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. The weight of Ellie's message crushed her. She knew she had to tell Lenny, but the thought of it was almost too much to bear. A distraught Bianca shared Ellie's departing words with Lenny, who was consumed by anger and worry. Lenny paced the room, fists clenched. "We can't just let her go like this," he said, his voice shaking. Bianca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We have to find her," she whispered. Lenny looked at the note, his heart breaking. "I'll start searching now," he said, determination hardening his features. Determined, Lenny scoured the neighborhood, calling Ellie's name and asking if anyone had seen her. He knocked on doors, stopped joggers, and even checked the local park. "Have you seen a teenage girl, dark hair, about this tall?" he asked everyone he met. Faces showed concern, but no one had seen Ellie. Lenny's worry deepened with each passing minute. He refused to give up, his desperation growing. His search led him to the local marina, where he spotted Ellie discreetly boarding a ferry. Lenny's heart pounded as he quickened his pace, eyes fixed on her figure. She moved with purpose, blending into the crowd. "Ellie!" he called, but the wind and distance swallowed his voice. He watched as she stepped onto the ferry, her back to him. Lenny's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't lose her again. Without hesitation, Lenny boarded the ferry, finding Ellie seated, oblivious to her father's presence. He scanned the deck, spotting her near the railing, staring out at the water. The ferry's engine rumbled to life as it pulled away from the dock. Lenny weaved through the crowd, his heart racing. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. She looked so small and lost, and his resolve strengthened. Quietly, he took the seat next to her, preparing himself for a crucial conversation. Lenny watched her for a moment, gathering his thoughts. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the weight of her decisions. "Ellie," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned, her eyes widening in surprise. Lenny took a deep breath, ready to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Startled, yet relieved, Ellie recognized her father but remained guarded in her reaction. She stiffened, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. Lenny gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I had to find you," he said softly. Ellie's gaze softened slightly, but she kept her distance, uncertainty clouding her features. The tension between them was palpable. Lenny assured Ellie, "Don't run. I'm not here to get you back," seeking to calm and connect with her. He leaned forward, trying to catch her eye. "I just want to talk," he said gently. Ellie eyed him warily, but didn't move. "Talk?" she repeated, doubt in her voice. Lenny nodded. "I promise, Ellie. No pressure, no forcing. Just a conversation," he said, hoping to bridge the gap between them. Ellie, still wary, listened as her father expressed his willingness to hear her out and understand her choices. "I know things have been tough," Lenny said, his voice filled with concern. "But I need to understand why you left and what's going on." Ellie crossed her arms, looking away. "It's not that simple," she murmured. Lenny reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "I'm here for you, Ellie. Please, just talk to me," he urged. The conversation turned towards Ellie's mysterious past, with Lenny patiently waiting for her to share her story. "You don't know everything that happened," Ellie began, her voice trembling. Lenny nodded, encouraging her to continue. "I've been through a lot, and it's not what you think," she said. Lenny's heart ached seeing her so distressed. "Take your time," he said softly. Ellie took a deep breath, preparing to reveal her painful memories. "It wasn't a kidnap like in one of those horror movies." Lenny listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. "They took me, yes, but it was because of a mistake," she continued. "They thought I was someone else." Lenny's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. Ellie sighed, ready to delve deeper into her story. She disclosed that her abductor had mistaken her for another child she was supposed to bring back to France, who had been illegally adopted. "They thought I was this girl, Sophie," Ellie explained, her voice steadying. "She was taken from her real parents and adopted illegally." Lenny's eyes widened in shock. "So, they thought you were Sophie?" he asked. Ellie nodded, looking down. "Yeah, they believed I was her, and took me away." Ellie continued, explaining the confusion when they met the French parents, who did not recognize her. "When we got to France, it was chaos," Ellie said, her voice tinged with sadness. "The parents were expecting Sophie, but they saw me instead. They knew right away I wasn't their child." Lenny felt a mix of anger and sorrow. How could they make such a mistake? He wondered aloud. Ellie shrugged. They were desperate. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Ellie's abductor decided to care for her rather than risk exposure. "She didn't know what to do with me," Ellie said, her tone softening. "She could have just abandoned me, but instead, she chose to take care of me." Lenny was stunned. "Why would she do that?" he asked. Ellie looked out at the water, lost in thought. "Maybe she felt guilty, or maybe she just couldn't let go," she replied. Ellie revealed her complex feelings towards the woman who raised her, hinting at a conflicted but significant bond. "She wasn't all bad," Ellie admitted. "She treated me well, like her own daughter." I hated her for taking me away, but I also cared about her. Lenny listened, his heart aching. That must have been confusing, he said gently. Ellie nodded. It was. I didn't know how to feel. She was my captor, but also my caregiver. Lenny listened intently, understanding more about Ellie's life in France and the unintended yet profound connections she had formed. It was a strange life, Ellie said. I went to school, made friends, and lived like any other kid. But there was always this shadow hanging over me. Lenny nodded, his expression softening. It sounds like you went through a lot, he said. Ellie looked at him, tears in her eyes. I did, she whispered. Ellie shared how the mistaken identity led to her living an unexpected yet fulfilling life in France. I found a new normal there, she said quietly. School, friends, even a new language. It was different, but good in its own way. Lenny listened, a mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. It sounds like you made the best of a tough situation, he said. Ellie nodded. I did. I had to. Together, they discussed the possibility of reconciling Ellie's new reality with their family life in New York. I can't just leave everything behind, Ellie said, her voice trembling. Lenny nodded, understanding her dilemma. Maybe we can find a way to balance both worlds, he suggested. Ellie looked hopeful but uncertain. Do you think Mom would understand? She asked. Lenny sighed. It won't be easy, but we have to try, he replied. Lenny proposed a visit to France for Bianca to experience Ellie's life there firsthand, fostering understanding and acceptance. If she sees what your life is like, it might help, Lenny said. Ellie hesitated, then nodded slowly. It could work, she agreed. But will she agree to it? Lenny smiled gently. We'll have to explain everything carefully. She loves you, Ellie. She'll want to understand. Ellie looked relieved, but still anxious about the idea. Resolving their immediate conflict, they planned to discuss everything with Bianca, hoping for her support. We need to be united when we talk to her, Lenny said. Ellie nodded. I know. It's just a lot, she admitted. Lenny squeezed her hand reassuringly. We'll take it one step at a time, he said. First, we get back home, and then we'll explain everything to your mom. Ellie took a deep breath, preparing for the next challenge. Back in New York, Ellie and Lenny shared their plan with Bianca, who was initially overwhelmed but gradually understanding. France? To see her life there? Bianca asked, her voice shaking. Lenny nodded. It could help us all understand and heal, he explained. Bianca took a deep breath, looking at Ellie with tears in her eyes. I just want you to be happy, she said. Ellie smiled softly. This could be a way to make it work, she said, hopeful. Bianca, emotional yet moved by Ellie's experiences, agreed to visit France to better understand her daughter's current life. If this is what it takes to truly understand, then I'll go, Bianca said, her voice thick with emotion. Ellie looked at her mother, relief washing over her. Thank you, Mom, she whispered. Lenny smiled, placing a hand on Bianca's shoulder. We'll do this together, he said, feeling hopeful for the first time in a while. The family gathered to discuss their feelings openly, planning their next steps with a focus on unity. They sat around the kitchen table, sharing their fears and hopes. I'm scared, but I want to understand, Bianca admitted. Ellie nodded. I know it's hard, but I need you to see my life there, she said. Lenny listened, feeling a sense of unity growing. We'll figure this out together, he said, bringing them all closer. The upcoming trip to France was seen as a bridge to mend their fractured relations and embrace Ellie's dual life. This trip isn't just about seeing where you lived, Lenny said. It's about healing. Bianca nodded, holding Ellie's hand. We need to understand your world to fully support you, she said. Ellie smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope. This is the first step, she said, feeling the bond with her parents strengthen. A family decision was made to support Ellie living in both countries, respecting her ties to her new home. You shouldn't have to choose between us and your life in France, Lenny said. Bianca nodded in agreement. We can find a way to make both work, she added. Ellie's eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she said softly. They all knew it wouldn't be easy, but they were committed to making it work. The visit to France helped Bianca and Lenny appreciate Ellie's new life and the community she had become part of. They walked through the streets, met her friends, and saw the places she spoke about. I can see why you love it here, Bianca said, smiling. Lenny nodded. It's a beautiful place, and the people are wonderful, he said. Ellie felt a weight lift off her shoulders, knowing her parents finally understood. Impressed and touched by the warmth and love Ellie received in France, they decided to buy a home there. This place feels right, Bianca said, as they toured a charming house near the town center. Lenny nodded, picturing their new life. We can make this work, he agreed. Ellie's eyes sparkled with happiness. I can't believe this is happening, she said, hugging her parents. They signed the papers, committing to a new chapter together. Ellie, reassured by her parents' support, felt a renewed connection and a stronger bond with them. They spent their days exploring the town, sharing meals, and laughing together. I feel like a family again, Ellie said one evening, her voice filled with emotion. Bianca smiled, tears in her eyes. We never stopped being a family, she replied. Lenny squeezed Ellie's hand. We're here for you, always, he said, and Ellie felt truly at home. Final preparations were made for Bianca and Lenny to move to France, cementing their decision to stay close to Ellie. They packed up their old life in New York, shipping boxes and arranging for the house to be sold. It's a big change, but it feels right, Lenny said. Bianca nodded. We're following our hearts, she added. Ellie helped them settle into their new home, their bond growing stronger each day. Ellie decided against pressing charges, choosing to focus on her future with her family, now united in understanding and support. It's time to move forward, she said, looking at her parents. I don't want to dwell on the past. Lenny and Bianca respected her decision. We support you, whatever you choose, Bianca said. Ellie felt a weight lift, her heart lightening. Thank you, she said, ready to embrace her new life. She moved in with her parents in their home in France, and they worked on building their relationship while making up for lost time. They spent evenings talking about their hopes and dreams, taking walks in the picturesque town. I'm so glad we're doing this, Ellie said one day, smiling. Lenny and Bianca nodded, feeling the same. We're a team, Lenny said. Together, they found joy in the present and hope for the future, united as a family once more. Do you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for your cooperation.